Today on the show, former Imagineer Chris Runco returns to discuss the Disney resort that was once being planned for Long Beach, California. The resort would have been called Port Disney, but it sadly never came to fruition. But why exactly did Disney even consider building a resort in Long Beach that would include a new theme park with a familiar name, multiple hotels, an aquarium, and so much more? We'll dive into that history, and Chris will share details with us all about the development and brainstorming of this unrealized resort. Well, at least some of it was unrealized. Certain aspects were dusted off and can be found in other Disney resorts. Enjoy my conversation with former Imagineer Chris Runco.
Prepare for some insight. You've tuned in to an exclusive DCTC interview.
Hello, Chris, and welcome back to Disney Coast to Coast. So happy to have you back here.
Good to see you.
Yeah, last time you were on, we had a whole conversation about your career with Walt Disney Imagineering, and you kind of dropped this bit of information that you were working on a project with Walt Disney Imagineering for Long Beach, California, and the area surrounding the Queen Mary. And this is a bit of Disney history that you hear a ton about, but I feel like people don't know too much about it. So thank you for coming on to talk about it.
It's a fun story to talk about.
Excellent. So let's start with a bit of the history, because how exactly did Disney and Long Beach, California come about, right? And the name Jack Rather has a lot to do with it. I'm sure you know this name, correct?
Right. Yeah. The Disneyland Hotel.
Right. So Jack Rather was the owner of the Disneyland Hotel, because when Walt was opening Disneyland, he couldn't afford to build a hotel because he was out of money. So Jack Rather did it. And in 1988, Disney finally got ownership of that hotel. So that would be during your time at Disney, correct?
Yeah, I started there in 76.
You know, when they bought the Disneyland Hotel, what they really bought was the Rather Corporation. And part of that portfolio included the lease and the rights to the Queen Mary and the surrounding area. And they sold off a lot of the stuff that they wanted, that they got with the Rather Corporation. But for some reason, this kind of sparked their interest, this whole Long Beach area. And a whole project was designed around it. And of course, the Queen Mary, if folks listening don't know, the Queen Mary was part of White Star Line. It was, a huge ocean liner. White Star Line, of course, a lot of people think of Titanic. Therefore, the ship does get a lot of comparisons. It looks slightly similar. In reality, the Queen Mary is actually bigger, even though it only has 3 funnels versus the 4 that Titanic had or has. And the idea was to build a whole project around this. So how were you getting involved with that? Like, at what point did they bring you in to start talking about this Long Beach Port Disney project?
There was a small team that started working on it, and then they'd been working on it about a few weeks, and then decided to enlarge the team and do some charrettes, brainstorming about what we could do with the Queen Mary and the land around it. So we started having a series of meetings on the Queen Mary, and we were doing exactly that. We were starting basically at ground zero. We were or very much step one. We were doing the 3x5 cards on the storyboards and the little thumbnail sketches, that kind of thing, to talk about what we could do with it and make it make it a theme park, make the area around it into a theme park. I joined it. I remember Doris Woodward. I remember Kim Murphy being a part of that. Jan Circus, if you've ever heard that name, wonderful architect. I think I recall as many as a dozen of us working on these charrettes.
So what's a charrette?
Charrette is just a brainstorming session. It comes from an architectural term. It's the way I understand it is architectural firms. It's a French term, and it basically meant everybody would put in their ideas together, and they often did it by throwing all the drawings they came up with on a cart, which was called a charrette. And so it ended up being the term for the brainstorming themselves. So we often had either at Imagineering, or sometimes we would go to some other facility, get a little away from the usual business in the office, and put a team of us, and we'd have like a whole day, or maybe it would be 2 or 3 days. Some of the more famous ones are, you remember the big charrette they did to come up with California Adventure, and that was in Colorado. So yeah, we call them charrettes, and this was literally going into a nice stateroom on the ship, and spending, as I remember, it was several days, 3 to 5 days, of talking about all kinds of ideas that we could do with the ship. And of course, we also got to tour the ship and look at it real closely and see areas that the guests never see, to give us background as to what was available.
And at that point, was the Queen Mary a hotel, or what was it being used for at that point? Currently, it's a hotel, and there's entertainment on it. So this would have been late 80s, early 90s. Were you going onto a ship that like the public still had access to, or not?
Yeah, they did have access, and it was a hotel. You know, for some reason, it seems to me like I don't remember seeing the public on there. So I wonder if there was some period where they shut it down, like for maintenance. Basically, what it was used for then is just exactly what you mentioned. There were the staterooms were being rented out. They had various activities, entertainment activities there. The Spruce Goose was next door. There were outdoor activities that happened several times a year. So that was ongoing while we were having these conversations. Whether maybe not that specific week, but that was ongoing.
All right. So on July 31st, 1990, Port Dizney was announced, and they had to convince the public and the city of Long Beach to allow them to do this. We're kind of going through something similar right now with the whole Disneyland Forward project that's happening, and needing to convince the city of Anaheim to allow it to happen. So that's what they had to do with this Port Dizney project. So they sent out a newsletter to Long Beach locals. It was called the Port Dizney News, and it said right on it, Dizney Sea, which might be a name that sounds very familiar to some of you. What this newsletter said was, "Welcome to Dizney Sea. Here you will experience a thrilling journey through the mysteries, challenges, and natural wonders of the sea. Among the highlights of your trip will be an intimate encounter with our planet's most important environmental resource and the chance to participate in exciting research activities conducted by some of the leading oceanic scientists." So to me, when I hear this, I immediately think of like the living seas at Epcot, currently the Seas with Nemo and Friends, which Disney, already had a history with. Were you guys kind of taking from that at all?
Yeah, I think the initial idea, you recall this, this happens right before we start thinking about Westcott. And so we're thinking about how to take some of those things. Kim Murphy, did the Seas Pavilion and was at SeaWorld before that. So his expertise and his contacts, and naturally being right there on the ocean would be the perfect place to have a seas type of, or some of those same themes and activities as part of the entertainment.
And now this whole Port Dizney project, yeah, we've talked about a theme park, but it was a massive project. It was like 400 plus acres for this resort. There were going to be 5 hotels to start, which is crazy. A monorail, the theme park called Dizney Sea. There was kind of 2 sides to it. There was the city side and the port side. So the city side is currently these days, if you're familiar with Long Beach, is the Pike Outlets and the Aquarium of the Pacific. And then the port side was around the Queen Mary area. And I know Long Beach a decent amount. I spend a good amount of time at the Long Beach Convention Center. And those, if I'm remembering correctly, are kind of 2 very separate areas. Were they going to be connected by the monorail? Was that the plan?
I think I remember that seeing some kind of indication of, looping those 2 areas together, I think with more than one system.
But it was indeed 2 separate areas, yeah?
Oh, yeah, it's still, physically, there's the outlet of the river, the LA River, coming down through there, through and out to the ocean, and the breakwater that connects that. I remember going down to the Pike, Long Beach Pike, when I was young. I have vague memories of that. And my dad told me that he's 100 now, so he told me that when they were kids, they would go down there to body surf. Because this was before the breakwater was put in. So the shore there by the aquarium, that was the ocean shore. and the breakwater was added later that created the bay where the Queen Mary sits now. There is a fair distance. It's not a short walk to connect, go over that bridge, and then out to the Queen Mary from the Pike side of the river.
Yeah, if you're familiar with the area, it really is. I mean, that was two different projects, really. So quite impressive. It was expected to cost $2 billion in 1990 money and 10 years to build, with the planned opening in the year 2000. But let's talk a bit about what was going to be within Dizney Sea, the theme park. Disney sought to sell their plan by not only offering a new, innovative theme park, but also an unparalleled marine research facility that would include public interaction. At the center of Dizney Sea was to be Oceana, a spectacular futuristic aquarium designed as giant reflective orbs that was both thematically educational and entertaining. To me, very Spaceship Earth vibes with these giant orbs, yeah?
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And there was quite a bit of land there. There was a couple of main concerns about that space, which are still true today. This is right next to the active port of Long Beach. Mm-hmm. When you look from the ship, there's no possibility of creating a bermed theme area in this place. If you looked from the ship, or if you even looked from the land area around the Spruce Goose, you could see those huge cranes. They're like 300 feet tall. And that activity was going on. It was not only the machinery, the visual intrusion, but there's a lot of noise from a major port like that. That was a concern. Like, how do we make this a beautiful space when we have these intrusions, visual intrusions that are part of the picture? And kind of inescapable at that size.
Yeah, and to this day, I mean, Carnival Cruise and all these other cruise lines use that port to go in and out. And I mean, it is kind of fun to think, though, if Disney had done this, it probably would have been a port for Disney Cruise Line at this point.
Right. Yeah. No, it was, well, that part of it, being on the real ocean, as opposed to the Seas Pavilion and our enormous artificial aquarium. It was exciting to be on the ocean, and the thought of doing a theme park I'd grown up with Marineland.
Oh, and Palos Verdes?
Yeah, I love that place. And it was, and I think Kim, if I remember right, I think Kim was connected with Marineland. Kim Murphy was connected with Marineland before he went to SeaWorld. But you were there right on the ocean, and some aspects of that, like you mentioned the cruise ships. I remember while we're doing this concepting, going down there on a weekend and going out on the stern of the Queen Mary and watching a cigarette boat race, which they would have that would go all the way out to the breakwater and around. And of course, these boats, they're huge and they're going 70 miles an hour on the water. You can't do that in Anaheim. Right. So the fact that you have, and when you mention the aquarium, and now, of course, Long Beach has a wonderful aquarium right there at the ocean. So there were a lot of things about having that you don't have you didn't have the ability to do a Disneyland bermed, beautiful piece of fantasy, but you had this remarkable environment that you were next to. So I think that's part of what everybody was excited with. And we tried ideas with the Spruce Goose too. There was a lot of history with that plane.
Yeah, so the Spruce Goose plane was also acquired with the whole the Rather Corporation buyout. So, yeah. Now, I don't know if you got this far into the process or not, because obviously anybody listening probably knows this park and resort didn't happen. But did you start thinking about kind of the different ways you'd have to deal with building a resort or a park like this to deal with the being so close to the ocean water? Like, as we all know, the ocean, just the dew in the air that comes from that salt water, it destroys metal and wood and everything. Did you get to the point of thinking about how are we actually going to do this and make it in a way that doesn't deteriorate quickly?
I think that's basically an engineering problem. We were just trying to come up with good ideas for good shows and a beautiful space. How to build it. I mean, I'm familiar with when we have that same problem, like anything with a lot of water involved. The Seas Pavilion itself is a good example. Typhoon Lagoon had, the same considerations. Actually, anything we do with a fountain has, considerations of water to deal with, and seawater is just that much more corrosive. But like any boat, it's just sort of the difference between having a car and in any place in the country versus having a car on the coast. You have issues there where you go, okay, I'm going to have to rust proof it better. I'm going to have to use stainless steel, those kind of choices on the materials. But that was secondary because that can, those are kind of known requirements. We know that our engineers know how to deal with that added factor. But no, it was more about how can we take this space and make it work and make it, as interesting and fun as possible, and connect it with Disneyland, and integrate the two, which I think ended up being one of the major hurdles that made it not so feasible.
Yeah, let me Google map this right now, actually. I don't know the exact distance. They're not far, but they're not close. Like, it's definitely something you can do, like, in a day trip sort of thing if you're at one versus the other, but it's not, especially with LA traffic. Let me see.
Yeah. That's a good question. See what your Google map says. Off the top of my head, I'd say it's be a 45-minute drive.
So it's 26.5 miles away from each other. Actually, it is as close as 31.7 miles. Actually, there's one that's 26.6 miles. So depending on where you go. So somewhere between like 26 and, but then the range right now, the traffic's not terrible at this very moment, but it's about a 51-minute drive. So Let's say an hour drive to be safe.
Yeah. Keep in mind this is before rush hour traffic. So
yeah, it's the middle of the day. Yeah. So It's one of those things that it's like, it's not like going from Disney's Animal Kingdom to Magic Kingdom, which is a hassle in and of itself, but like doable. This is definitely like you're spending a day at Disneyland Resort and then you're spending a day at Port Disney. And I think you said that might have even been part of the reason why this was ultimately decided not to go, correct?
Yeah, I think I was even in one discussion where the executives, and I'm thinking this would probably included Jack Lindquist at the time. I remember Disney, operations and marketing folks there talking about all these ramifications. You have another ticket, so you can sell people, a ticket for both places, but you do have this hour, and do you provide some transportation? There's a lot of aspects to it. And, LA traffic, we just said it's 50 minutes, and that's in relatively easy traffic. So that was a concern, balanced with the fact that you've got these assets, you got this amazing ship that, pretty unique in the world, with this gorgeous design to it. All the interior spaces are still some of the best examples of Art Deco in the world, beautifully done. And you have this large space, and you have a city that's very excited about having more entertainment, having those assets. And you have the Spruce Goose as a piece of it. I think one of the other glaring problems was that Michael Eisner did not see the Spruce Goose as much of an attraction. And it is, to be fair, I love aerospace history as much as anyone, but you'd walk in there and see it and go, boy, that is a huge plane, and they made it out of wood, and you'd walk around it, and then you're kind of done. It was, take a look inside. So it to really get the value, it made sense. It makes sense now in hindsight that it's ended up at a museum up north. And it's a spectacular engineering accomplishment, but it was basically just a tremendously big plane, which was obsolete the day it flew. Basically, that's why it didn't go any further. They built it for, I remember reading this, that, there were seaplanes that were huge, the China Clipper, that right before World War II, that was quite a exciting technology. By the end of the war, they'd built airfields all over the Pacific. They had planes that could go these distances. You did not need a seaplane anymore to do these trips. There's still it was fun. It's fun to fly a seaplane like out to Catalina Island, but you just don't need it. So here you had built this enormous plane for a specific purpose that by the time it was flying was already obsolete. So that was part of it. There was also in the display, there was a beautiful fighter plane, or there's a plane that Howard Hughes built, and I don't know the identification on it. It looks a lot like a P-51 Mustang because it was the precursor. A lot of things that Howard Hughes came up with in the design of that plane and set speed records with that's one of the reasons the Mustang was designed as it was, because the lessons learned from that plane. So that was part of the display. But that big dome, I remember going in and seeing that the first time and going, this is the worst way to stage this plane that you could possibly think of, because the biggest aspect of it is it's huge as aircraft go, and it looks small inside that dome because, of course, the dome was 3 times the size of the plane. So that was dragging it down. In fact, one of the things I designed was, I found the drawing recently, I designed a hangar that was more like the original hangar for the Spruce Goose. And if you see pictures of it, it's this strange contraption because it basically, there was kind of 3 hangars, one for each wing, and then one for the body that was taller and that was high enough to get the tail out. So you had this, it was kind of like this picture you see, you look at the package, you go, okay, that's got to be an airplane because of the shape of it. So I remember designing one that was out, and originally the show idea was that we'd have this thing so people could see the plane in a hangar, like designed after the original hangar. And it actually, you could bring the plane out where it appeared to be just about to go and taxi out. So that was one of the ideas, the sort of more historical aspect of the whole project.
Well, the park would also include the Future Research Center, described by Port Disney News as a state-of-the-art research laboratory where guests could interact with some of the nation's top marine scientists conducting oceanographic research. The facility would be used by local marine scientists and connected to local universities and school. So once again, this was a very heavy, education sort of park or resort. This was the Epcot model.
Yeah, if you again about the site, it is not a site that lends itself to a berm, a fantasy experience, leaving the world behind. You have the actual Port of Long Beach with the huge structures. You have the city right across the way. If anything, if you tried to do that, you'd be just fighting all the things there is, in essence, what the natural aspects of it are. So that's where the activities to use the ocean, to have boats as part of the show. You could imagine they could have done a Phantasmic out there. You could have races, which they already had in Long Beach. You could do a lot of those kind of activities. You could build sea-themed shopping. There's a lot of things you could do, but it's not the place to create the fantasy that you can when you can put a berm up and leave the outside world behind. And of course, the Queen Mary itself, when you're on it, you have an amazing view, on the decks there of Long Beach. So you had to use those, make those a main part of your entertainment.
And Phantasmic on the ocean just made my mind explode. Can you even imagine? Logistically kind of a nightmare, but also super cool.
Oh yeah, sure. And per what you were saying about maintenance, the poor entertainment guys, if we'd done such a thing, would be pulling their hair out because they'd be in an ocean environment instead of Anaheim. Yeah. Do it. Let's do it and make it 10 times harder to keep up.
Yeah, exactly. So listen, there was a lot of education, but it wasn't all education. There were certainly rides. There was a Fleets of Fantasy and the Boardwalk area where visitors would find exotic ships of fable and lore lining the waterfront, incorporating rides and dining places, and a boardwalk offered whimsical turn-of-the-century amusement park rides with seafaring story themes. The Boardwalk was to be a nostalgic recreation of the Pike, the once great amusement park on the Long Beach waterfront from 1902 to 1979. Now, this might sound a little familiar to folks if they know Disney theme parks. It might not have happened in Long Beach, but sounds a little bit Disney California Adventure, Paradise Pier, wouldn't you say?
True. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, remember, this is the precursor. That this was kind of part of the whole story of California Adventure, in that here we tried to do this and then looked at the balance sheet and said, here's the positive aspects of this, and then here's the downside of this. And the decision then was to go, you know what, we better just go back up and use the land we have in Anaheim and because we want to create that synergy, that critical mass of the several hotels and several parks. And it's just going to work a heck of a lot better there than it's going to work to try and do it, 26 miles apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is an area called Heroes Harbor, where visitors enter through a maze called Aqua Labyrinth with walls of water to find high seas thrill rides themed after mythical and legendary seafarers such as Sinbad and Ulysses. So this was interesting because you're kind of going into like mythology and such, not so much Disney intellectual properties with something like this.
Yeah, all those stories of the sea.
So actually, this would have been, when you guys were planning, this would have been early 90s, which means the hit of The Little Mermaid would have recently come out. Was there ever any talk about working The Little Mermaid into any of this?
I don't remember Little Mermaid coming into it. I think if I remembered the specific timing, I think we might have happened a little bit before that film. We might have been doing this thought process a little before the film was actually there, because it certainly would have made sense. But no, I don't remember Little Mermaid being a part of the conversation.
Yeah, so Little Mermaid would have been late 1989, and you might have been, they announced this to the public in 1990, so you're probably brainstorming stuff in 87, 88. And 88, I think, is when they got it. I think it was 88, I said. Let me go back and check. Yeah, 1988 is when they got the Disneyland Hotel and the Rather Corporation. So that makes sense. You were probably brainstorming a bit before Mermaid, but I feel like that would have very much affected this whole area had that continued.
It could. What year did you say Little Mermaid came out?
It was November of 1989. I think it was November.
1989. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It could be that I just don't recall it being a part of the, or at least a major part of the conversation. It may be that part of that was you recall that the original idea of Epcot was it was not going to be a place for the characters. Mm-hmm. It was going to be different. And I think that was true here too. And per what you just read about all those aspects of the sea and sea mythology and places in the past, I recall that conversation about what all could we draw from, aside from, Disney animated films and the Disney legacy itself. Could this be a whole different thing?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. It's very much the opposite of what the Walt Disney Company would do today, right? Like these days, it's like, how do we fit IP into everything? This was kind of the opposite, and it was kind of refreshing, but perhaps not what today's audience wants. Who knows? Here's something I would bet money on. If Port Disney did happen and you opened it the way that it was originally intended, by now, Nemo, Mermaid, 20,000 Leagues, all of that would be in there at this point.
Yeah. And instead, what we're figuring out ways to stick them into the parks we've got, right? Use that IP there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you recall that I remember this exercise, which was Epcot the first example? No, there's probably earlier ones, but I remember the cautionary tale that we opened Epcot with the idea, this is for a little older audience. This is going to be a whole different take for Disney. It's going to broaden our audience. And what happened? The Disney fans came. The Disney audience. And the Disney audience is the family audience. And they walked in there with their whole family and they said, oh, these are wonderful, but where's Mickey? Where's the other parts of Disney that we love? And it was very shortly, after we opened, where they got Mickey and Minnie over there and the other characters. And it's been a part of it ever since. And I remember, I think the first person I had who described it was Joe Rohde said, our history tells us people come to a Disney project for what Disney means, that entertainment for the whole audience, for the whole family. You have to start with that. Then if you want to broaden it and add things, the aspects that are geared toward teenagers or geared toward, different generations of people specifically, you can add on to it. But you've got to start with the main target. The main Disney audience is where you start. That's family entertainment. Epcot did that, and in a sense, we did some of that with California Adventure, and each time we had the same lesson. People come in and goes, that's great, but where's Mickey?
What's so fascinating about that statement is it makes me think about like creators in general. How often are creative people creating something and they feel like they're stuck in they're pigeonholed or stuck in this kind of rut where they can't perhaps try things they want to try because their audience really expects this one thing from them. And you hear about this all the time with artists. I'd never really thought about it with the Walt Disney Corporation. You'd think, oh no, we're and listen, I know the lessons of Epcot and DCA and stuff like that, but I'd never thought of it like that way. And that's an interesting way to like Disney's kind of stuck in that pigeonhole to a point.
Yeah, stuck is a loaded word because in one sense you could say the company owns it. Kind of,
now they do. Very much so.
Right. It's one of the most well-known brands in the world, one of the most popular brands in the world, and Disney means something to people. And remember, Touchstone was an aspect of going, okay, we want to make some other kinds of film. We better brand it differently, even though it's coming from the same place. That's brand management, I suppose. You talk to a brand management expert about that. But it's really interesting the way you put it, because I'm familiar with that with visual artists, with musicians. It does. How many times has somebody had a concert where they come out and they start to play their new music and the audience is going, we want your hits. We came to hear you play your hits. So they, the good ones, it seems like it's always true. They mix those things together, that the successful artists mix the old and the new because they know that's what and they can appreciate that and not find ways to not feel trapped by that, but it's part of, and I know painters and other visual artists have had the same problem. It's successful. So that's what, you want to keep doing and everybody associated with you wants to keep doing. So, and maybe that's one reason we seem to keep once in a while the company and whatever group is there at the time, whatever generation, they're going, let's try something new. And then the aspects of it work. And then they go, yeah, but you know what? Our strong suit is still what people expect when they come in the door. Right? Alien Encounter had that problem.
Mm-hmm.
We opened it with an idea that we're going to put a sign in the door and say, guys, this is not your average Disney show. This is going to be a little more edgy, a little scarier and all that. And boy, did we have problems with that because people walked in the door and then said, you scared the heck out of my kids. Well, didn't you see the sign? It doesn't matter. The sign was this big and the name Disney is a lot bigger. So people, their expectations were not in line with trying that. It didn't work well there.
Just to go off topic for a quick second, when it comes to extraterrestrial alien encounter, do you think if that attraction had gone in a different park, if it wasn't Magic Kingdom, do you think it would have been, like, say it was Disney's Hollywood Studios, where arguably it fits better? Do you think it would have flopped as hard as it did?
I don't think it would have been the same reaction, but I think it would still have had some of the same paradox. Because, and the reason I say that is I remember having that aspect of even Great Movie Ride, where I took my little kids there, not expecting, and it was super scary for them. In hindsight, I felt terrible that I'd taken them through the ride. And I kind of had even as close as I was to those things, I kind of had a misunderstanding about how scary it was going to be. We had to do that. Think of, well, that's in Disneyland, Snow White's Scary Adventures, right?
Yeah.
Because the reaction they'd have over years where people loved it, but there were a lot of little kids that were terrified. And so they had to start telling people very loudly, there's scary stuff in here. Why, be thoughtful before you walk in. But that, again, is at the Magic Kingdom. But you're right, maybe at Studio Tour it would be. And the other thing is generationally, these things are different. What people expect now versus what they did back then, those many years. No, our expectations are different. We have we have all the streaming services now. We have all the games that we've got that they're out there. The environment is completely different. So what would happen with it today? It was fun though. I remember that effect was so amazing when I first got a chance to try it out, in the shop, and the audio effect of, feeling like the thing was breathing down your neck. You remember the great moments with Mr. Lincoln where the barber comes up and clips
the hair. Yep. I remember that.
Everybody's going, oh my God. Yeah, it's quite a remarkable effect.
Yeah, that was that was a whole, I don't know how long that lasted, but there was a whole audio version of Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln that was super, super unique. But in any case, back to Port Disney. Let's go to Mysterious Island, where visitors would also enjoy high seas thrill rides, find the lost city of Atlantis. Of course, the Atlantis Disney animated film was years off from there, but find the lost city of Atlantis and buried treasure on Pirate Island, and journey through dangerous underwater caverns on Nemo's lava cruiser. So maybe they were tying in 20,000 Leagues a bit there. I'm not sure. But the section would prominently feature a flaming volcano. That sounds familiar.
Yeah. I forgot to mention a couple other people that I recall were involved in this, and that is Steve Kirk and Tim Kirk, who, the creative geniuses behind Disney Seas over in Tokyo. And son of a gun, they got their volcano, didn't they?
They did, yeah. So obviously,
yeah. Doesn't it sound like, it's like where that, a lot of things that were in that project. So,
well, listen, this project, the theme park part, was called Disney Sea. They end up building a Tokyo Disney Sea, so there's definitely some crossover here.
We don't throw anything away.
That's right. So far we got a bit of Disney California Adventure from this concept, and we got some Tokyo Disney Sea from it. You can point out if there's any others that I'm missing. And also, this was inspired somewhat by Epcot, it sounds like. But
yes, yeah, all those things. And it's that, because all those, you can see where those ideas were a direct continuum, and then they continued on even if the project went another direction.
That's right.
So, yeah.
There was also Venture Reefs, where visitors would experience themed beaches patterned after Caribbean, Asian, Polynesian, and Mediterranean beaches and waterfronts. These waters included sunken ships. So what was this? Was this in the ocean, or would this have been man-made? Do you know this project at all?
I don't remember too many details, but I'll tell you, it wouldn't have been in the ocean.
Okay.
It was anything like that. We would have created the space, You have the advantage of having ocean water right there that could probably be part of your water system, but you do not want you don't want to deal with the aspects of the open ocean, and you want to have all that controlled. So we would have built our own.
And there was going to be like 250 acres of landfill for part of this project as well, right?
Well, it's. I think some of that's landfill now. I think that part we were working on is landfill. So yeah, adding on to it, it's a large space even as it is. I don't know how many acres. I don't recall how many acres it has, but it was a large piece of land to start with. And I can vaguely remember some. I think Chris Carradine was involved too, and he did a lot of master planning. And I believe there were several versions of putting the pieces all together around the ship. Anyway, yeah, there's a lot of things there that could be fun, and we did make, as we had pointed out, we did make use of a lot of those ideas later on. I enjoy that. You've been to the ship?
Yeah, a bunch. And I was going to actually say, folks should know that you can visit this. The Queen Mary, open to the public. You can see exactly where this was going to be. You can go on the ship for their various tours or an overnight stay or their shows. So, if this subject matter interests you, the next time you go to Disneyland, plan a trip to the Queen Mary. It's certainly not like what Disney would have done with it. It's had some hard times through the years. It's currently kind of on an upswing. The city of Long Beach has taken it over again, and hopefully it's going to just keep getting better and better and better. But Halloween events happen there. There are big concerts that happen there. It is a big entertainment venue. So to me, it's just really intriguing to think what could have been if Disney had actually done it.
Yeah, the ship is magnificent. It's just the spaces in it are wonderful. The various ballrooms to go up on the upper deck, the flying bridge. I remember going out on the flying bridge, which is the part. There's the bridge where they have the captain's, the whole helm of the ship, and then the flying bridge literally reaches out past the edge of the ship on both sides. And that way somebody can be out there who's watching, because of course you can't see down very well from the helm. And so the spaces are just gorgeous. They're those clubs, the beautiful architecture, the paintings, the tile, the brass detail. Oh, it was an interesting thing they showed us. when we were taking this first tour. You go into first class, and the hand railings throughout the ship are brass. And keep in mind that this ship was made for the North Atlantic. There was no air conditioning in the ship because there was no need for air conditioning. If anything, they had to keep it warm. But there was no need for any cooling because you're out on the Atlantic Ocean. So brass is used like it is in most ships and everything. But the handrails in first class are covered with white plastic in first class because plastic was brand new. And they advertised that there's this wonderful new material we're using in the first class areas called plastic. And when you touch the handrails, they're not cold like a brass rail would be. And so they all have this white ivory colored sleeve made of plastic, so imagine that was seen as something unique and special.
That's hilarious. I've actually never come across that on the ship all my time I've been on there.
Yeah, take a look. Yeah, it's like I said, we got a very detailed tour. A couple of anecdotes. So we got this tour and we went into the tour of the ship, and I think to this day, you go into a boiler room. Well, you see 2 of the boilers. There used to be 6 or more than that. I forgot the exact number, but there were quite a few. And the boiler room is interesting, but where the other ones are, that was all gutted. They scrapped as much metal as they could out of that ship when they brought it in to recover some of the expenditure. And one of the stories they told us was that when they first brought the ship in, they brought an architect in to say, okay, we don't need all this equipment in here. We'd like to make room for other activities. And secondly, we'd like to sell whatever we don't need for scrap. So the architect went in and he had them take out a lot of things. And they took some of the boilers out and scrapped them. Well, he took us in part of the ship. And this space, it's hard to describe, but it must be something like 80 feet tall. It's literally from the bilge. And you're looking down at, ships like that always have water in the bottom. So the bilge water, you're looking down below off this catwalk at the bilge water. You're looking up, and the ceiling above you is maybe 80 feet up there because it goes all the way to the main deck. And there are these huge columns that go down through the ship to the keel, the main structural columns. And the guide told us, he said, look at those columns and notice that those are riveted and those 2 are not. When this ship was built, the metal technology at the time was riveting it all together. And only after World War II did welding become the main way they put ships together. Those columns were taken out. The original columns were taken out in this remodeling they did when they brought the ship in. And shortly after they got it completed, the people working on it noticed there was a lot of creaking. And as you walked around, the ship seemed to be making an awful lot of noise, sometimes really loud. And, ships still do that. But this was really got everybody concerned. And so at some point, they called a naval architect who came out to see the ship. And he was there for a short time and came running out just pale and said, "What have you guys done? You're going to sink this thing. You've taken out some of the main structure of the ship. You have to put it back or it's going to collapse on itself." And so they literally had to go in and rebuild some of the steel in the ship. And that's the new columns that we saw in this space. And it was very eerie, too, because this space, there was no reason to light it, right? It just had some catwalk lights. So we're looking at it'd be a good horror movie to see this enormous space. It's 100 feet long and 100 feet or 80 feet tall. And the width of the ship, just this huge space with nothing but bilge water and a couple of catwalks and these columns sitting there. And he said, yeah, those were taken out. And that's why when they did that, they went too far. So that was fun to see.
It should be mentioned this ship had many lives. It started as an ocean liner, but it actually went into war as the Gray Ghost. The whole ship was painted gray and changed drastically inside, and then it became kind of an ocean liner again. Now it's a hotel sitting in Long Beach, so it's had a lot of different sorts of lives. It should be mentioned, though, if you walk through the ship to this day, they have photos of celebrities that spent time on the ship. And Walt Disney spent time on this ship. There are photos of him on the Queen Mary, And I'm curious, were you guys working any of that actual Walt Disney history into what you were doing? Was that a conversation at all?
Oh, yeah. The history of the ship is clearly one of the beautiful things about it and something to talk about. And Walt being a part of that, that was the best way to cross the Atlantic for a long time. Was that's what they were for, right? And they were built to do that quick trip. They weren't designed. A ship like that was not designed to like go cruising around like the Disney cruise ship do. It wasn't meant to go around the world. It wasn't meant to go to the Pacific. It was designed to go back and forth from, Europe to America, back and forth. And so it was fast, and it could do that job really well. So of course, he was on it as well as all these so many celebrities. So that history would have been a fun part of the show on the ship. It is to this day, but we had, a lot of ideas of how to enhance it in the space. They do those ghost tours. I think they still do those on there, and they have a wonderful Halloween experience every year, which, per your comment, people should try, because it's a lot of fun to be on that ship at Halloween. So when we got to do a tour, they took us through the ship, and we went into some of the places where there's supposed to be ghosts, because like every ship, there's stories about people that worked on it that disappeared, fell overboard, or were lost, and or got hurt. A few workers that got killed in an enormous construction project like that. And the lower areas of the ship have sea doors. Anybody knows a little bit about the Titanic will know about this. So there's sea doors that close in an emergency that seal off parts of the ship from each other, so that if something floods, it doesn't go through the whole ship. So there's these sea doors, and supposedly one young man working on it, they were telling us, during construction, got caught in one of those sea doors closing on him and got killed. And he's supposed to be one of the ghosts that people think they hear. So we're down in this kind of eerie area of the ship, and we're walking around, and he's telling this story, and I'd heard it. So a couple of us wandered off, and we went and, went up some stairs and over some ladders, and then I realized that I accidentally walked on the catwalk back to over the original group, and he's about finished with his story, and I stepped on something, and the whole catwalk creaked. And you should have seen how many people jumped. He's telling this ghost story, and all of a sudden there's this creak sound of steps over their heads. So I said, "No, it's just me. It's just me." There's area that it is fun to see all those aspects, and it's an amazing thing when you see the beautiful social areas of the ship with these beautifully detailed in Art Deco detail, and then you go down into these areas that were just functional, like the boiler room, and then, like I said, we got to see spaces that are not generally seen by the public. It's amazing. It's an incredible piece of work. It's just an enormous undertaking, and it was the state of the art technology at the time. So, and that's told. They still tell stories about that, and still give tours of it, as well as do the entertainment things they do.
Very cool. Well, part of Port Dizney would have been hotels, as I mentioned, and on the Long Beach side of Port Dizney was to be the 900-room Tidelands Hotel. That's the present location of the Pike Outlets. The 400-room Shoreline Hotel with retail and entertainment. That's the present location of the Pacific Aquarium, or the Aquarium of the Pacific, if you're familiar with that. And the 400-room Marina Hotel, which is presently the location of the Shoreline Drive parking lot east of the Convention Center. Then on the port side, that's the part we're talking about with the Queen Mary and everything, that was to be a huge 1,400-room Canal Hotel and also a 500-room Port Hotel. Also prominent on the port side would have remained the Queen Mary, continuing to serve as a converted hotel. So, that's a lot of hotels for an area with one theme park, but obviously they were using the city and so much more to take advantage of, people needing hotels.
Right. And it had to do with them looking to the future with the idea that they could make Long Beach even more of a tourist destination, both with our project, but probably future projects as well, like the aquarium they have built since.
It's terrific. It's the Aquarium of the Pacific.
I enjoy it. I've taken the grandkids down there, or my kids down there before, and it is a really beautiful one. It strikes me that you listed that, call it the concept in that newsletter, and all these ideas, which, if you think about it, is kind of a laundry list, that was sort of incorporating all the ideas. And it still might be that someone will come along and go, that's an opportunity. We could come and add aspects in this space, create more entertainment in this zone. possibly some of that will still happen.
One of the more interesting pieces of entertainment that's often there. I know this was there back when they did Queen Mary Dark Harbor. I'm not sure if it's been there since, and even maybe some of their Christmas events, but they would always have like the classic swings ride. And it was always promoted that it was the one direct from Neverland Ranch, Michael Jackson's old home. And they would hang a banner on it that said that, direct from Neverland Ranch. I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah.
Anywho, this project was going to bring 24,000 new jobs to Long Beach, and the city of Long Beach and residents were a bit reluctant about this. I know the California Coastal Commission wanted Disney to spend $75 million to offset the footprint of Port Dizney for a bunch of reasons. I mean, that's a huge price tag. The residents weren't thrilled with it, it sounded like. And for that and many other reasons, ultimately, they decided in December of 1991 to cancel the Port Dizney and Disney Sea project and refocus their energies and resources on the time they were calling it Westcott. It was the Westcott project that eventually became Disney California Adventure. And, you know, I don't think it's a stretch saying to go from something like Port Dizney to Disney California Adventure 1.0, two very drastically different projects. Did you end up transferring over to DCA?
Oh yeah, but between I worked on Westcott for a while.
And what was going on with Westcott? Because so Westcott was going to be where Disney California Adventure is, correct?
Yeah, correct. It was, as it says, a West Coast version of Epcot. We were working on things that were the same kind of themes incorporated into a theme park. So it was physically it wouldn't have been near as big because we didn't, look at how large Epcot and World Showcase are in terms of acreage. But taking those same ideas, it made sense to make an analog on the West Coast. We tackled it, put a lot of ideas into it, and ultimately it just didn't succeed. I think maybe in a sense, part of it was the fact that it was hard to compete with what Epcot was on a much smaller space. That our management knew what Epcot was, and this would have been the mini version of it in a lot of ways. And it was expensive. The price tag, the estimation of it was huge. So all these things just really took it out of contention, and that's when then we, the idea came up to do California Adventure instead.
Pretty wild. Now, we talked about how some of these aspects ended up in Tokyo Disney Sea, some in Disney California Adventure. I want to mention one other thing, because in Tokyo Disney Sea, which opened in 2001, so that's actually just 1 year after the whole Port Disney project was supposed to open, there is a steamer ship restaurant called Columbia. And when you look at this steamer ship, it looks a heck of a lot like the Queen Mary, doesn't it?
Yep. Yeah, it's beautiful. It's our homage to that, not just to the Queen Mary, but to that whole aspect of travel. And, it's a technical accomplishment.
Did you work on Tokyo Disney Sea at all?
No, I was busy working on California Adventure.
On Disney California Adventure, yeah.
Yeah, at that point.
That was a ton of insight into this Port Disney project that never came to be, sadly. Is there anything else that you want to touch on that perhaps, I didn't mention at all, or you want to discuss a bit more?
I was fortunate over the years to work on a lot of projects that we did design and then they happened. And there are an awful lot more projects that we designed over the years that never took off, that ended up on a drawer. I believe Tim Kirk, wonderful designer Tim Kirk, who, like I said, was part of the one of the geniuses behind Disney Seas and a lot of other things. He said he worked on projects at Imagineering for 10 years before he got to work on one that actually got built. So there's a lot of things in the drawers. There's a lot of ideas in the drawers. Sometimes we can reuse them. And this was one that, we put a lot of thought into and we had fun with it. And, because the Queen Mary in that location, there was a lot there to enjoy. Let me tell you one quick story. One day we decided we needed some really good aerial photography of the Queen Mary in the site. And I got to be the one that directed the film crew. So we went down there early one morning, and there is a helipad right next to the ship. And we went, got in a helicopter. And this is one of those where it's a bubble canopy and there's no doors. So the camera, Gary Kruger, I believe it was Gary Kruger, one of our great photographers, he and I and the pilot got in that thing and went up like 500 feet over Long Beach. And then I would point and say, let's get a shot from here. Let's get a shot from here. And I remember leaning out and going, there's nothing between me and that water that's 500 feet down below. And the boats are like the size of matchbox cars. You know, it's like tiny. That was a lot of fun to see Long Beach from that point of view. You know, I don't think too many people get to do it. And we got some great photography, and it helped us in our design process, you know, to have those shots and look at it. So like I said, there was fun along the way in putting it together. But it didn't happen, and you have to get used to that too. That you can put a lot of energy into something, and then it just doesn't gel. You know.
If there were one aspect of the project that, say, you could bring to reality, what little piece of it would you most like to see become real?
I love the idea of that panoply of ocean ideas, like to have I mean, you have that in a sense. You have it. You have a wonderful aquarium there now. That would have been a great neighbor to the ship. And it would be wonderful to have the sea theme with all those different, to have like a new pike, so to speak, and to have a wonderful, you know, there's Seaport Village, which actually friends of mine worked on the design of that, the one in San Pedro and in San Diego. Those are great, those little shopping areas with the coastal theme. And a place with all those ingredients would be really beautiful. It could be really fun. And I'd love to see, I always wanted another diving bell. I actually worked on how to put a diving bell, maybe faked a little bit, but a diving bell in California Adventure, you know.
Wait a second, what, a diving what?
A diving bell. If you go back and look at the pike, and I think you probably found them in a lot of seacoast, attractions like piers. A diving bell was literally that they'd put you in a submersible, and then they'd drop you into the water and let you sink. So you'd be go underwater for a short time, and then they'd lift you up, you know. And it was a bit of it's kind of like a combination of the thrill rides where they drop you and then pull you up so rapidly, you know, Tower Terror. But you're actually going into the ocean. And take a look at the pike, there's a beautiful version of a diving bell. Those kinds of attractions were always fun to do.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now on Google. That
you found it?
If you're claustrophobic, you don't want to do it.
Yeah, no, it's not, because you're really in a submersible. And
I was going to say, this is like, you know,
this is a real thing.
This is like when you get in to go check out the Titanic sort of stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yikes.
Yeah. I personally thought that would be a heck of a lot of fun. I had the idea at one point, I guess that when we redid Subride and we did Nemo, you know, I worked on the animation that we added to that as we were finishing it up, that we have the fun experience for folks who cannot actually go in the submarine. There along the queue, there's that separate room that you go in and you'll watch live video footage of the trip. So you get that aspect of it. You know, somebody in a wheelchair that's not able to transfer and those kind of things. I wanted to make that a diving bell. I wanted you to go in it and then have the experience that we are sending you down to watch the sub, but you're in a submersible, and, you know, add the effects that we could do to make you believe that we've sent you 100 feet down into the ocean and when you go see this. So, yeah, I've always loved the idea of a diving bell.
That's so cool. And honestly, if you had done that, I feel like there would have been a lot of people interested in that in addition to the submarine. You know what I mean? And that probably would have been the problem. It would have been like, oh, gosh.
It could be.
We can't accommodate that.
Why shouldn't it be as good as why shouldn't it be as good as the attraction?
Yeah.
You know, that would be a nice problem to have.
Yeah.
But it is great to have that experience. I'm glad we put that there. In all the different things the company does for accessibility. I think we do a great job of that. Anyway, no, I think that theme is great. And like I said, the experience, which people can still have today, as you mentioned, to go there on a weekend, it was just wonderful to sit on that beautiful deck. It's still a beautiful ship. And to sit on that deck and feel the ocean breeze and watch in that case, we were watching this race go on and just enjoying the seagulls flying by. It's a beautiful environment. And so even today, maybe somebody will decide. I think they're still working hard to make the ship itself pan out. It financially is difficult because there's an awful lot of maintenance costs, which also weighed on their decision, I think, to move to Anaheim instead. But there is opportunity there to do some more things. Maybe that will happen someday. I'm glad we got to use the ideas we did. I'm glad Tim and Steve and Kim and we all got to do to take some of those ideas and put them in places like Tokyo and in California Adventure. Like I said, we never throw anything away.
Perfect, Chris. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing some insight on Port Dizney. This was a really, really interesting conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. I enjoyed reminiscing. It was fun to do it, and we all learned something from it.
Thanks for tuning into this episode. Don't miss any future episodes by subscribing and following Dizney with a Z, coast to coast on your favorite podcast app, where episodes are available 24/7. If you're a longtime listener of the show, thank you. And if you have the means, consider supporting the show over on Patreon. By joining Dizney Coast to Coast's Patreon membership, you'll gain access to extra bonuses, including live stream Ask Me Anythings, unreleased episodes, and more bonus content. Take a look at all that's available by clicking the Patreon link in this episode's description, and thank you for considering. And thanks to Tahoian for leaving a 5-star rating and review saying, "This podcast is super fun to listen to. It's informative in an exciting way." Well, thank you very much. Leave a review wherever you listen to the podcast, and you may just hear it read on a future episode. Until next time, anything you need can be found in this episode's description. From additional information and links discussed in this episode found in the show notes, to the DCTC hotline where you can leave a voicemail and be heard on a future episode, contact info to reach me, access to the show's official website, some free gifts from me to you, and so much more. So be sure to check out this episode's description. Other than that, folks, have a magical day. Bye!